All right, and good afternoon, everybody. SpenVentures here. We are in Ocala, Florida. Just went through downtown. We are at Fort King, National National Historic Landmark, purposely for dating back to continuing my Civil War series and the wars that went on in the state of Florida, still going on that Civil War trek. And today is Fort King. Cannot wait to show you guys the fort itself. It's just beyond the hill there, just on top of that hill. That's the fort just behind the trees. But for right now, we're actually going to go head into the visitor center of Fort King and look at the history of the Civil War back in 1863, when the Confederates and the generals, or Union armies and Confederate armies, marched through here into Ocala to try to take over the state of Florida. So let's go ahead and learn some American history back in time in 1863 on April the 4th. Let's go.
Center.
Right.
And down the hill is a heritage garden.
Uh-huh.
They've got a mulberry tree down there, some herbs and little tomatoes you can try if you'd like. We've got a trail that goes around about 3/4 of a mile.
Okay.
Down this little trail is the Seep Spring, and it's the original water source that the soldiers used when they were here.
All right.
You can go inside the fort. Okay,
Yes.
go up in the block houses that they have.
Oh, wow.
And we've got the blacksmith shop right here that you can
Okay.
go peek into. Down here is the archaeology center, and they are open today also.
Oh, wow.
We've got a 12-minute video in the back
Okay.
that will give you a lot of information. We've got artifacts back here, and then these are all replicas of things that the soldiers would have used.
All
Are
right.
you interested in watching the video?
No, not right now.
Okay.
But mostly just to. All right, so let's right away go ahead and head into the soldiers at Fort King.
Well, if you wanted, you have a 12-minute video that I can show
They
you.
have
We're just kind of browsing through
100 miles from home.
that you have a good time. But
Hostile
there's always
frontier
some
environment. These are kind of what their
classes.
outfits they wore during the
Bird nerd. Yeah.
Civil War and Second Seminole War. There we go.
Yeah.
See this Union soldier in his uniform, and of course the U.S. soldiers. Florida landscape was like anything I ever experienced previously. Life was hard in Florida with long marches through heat and swamps. Infectious diseases, work was hard, rations often inadequate. Conditions enlisted soldiers, many volunteers, and members of the state military joined the fight in Florida. The soldiers at Fort King would have had regular contact with both settlers and Seminoles, leading to a level of understanding and sympathy between these groups in some cases. Once hostilities erupted, the veneer of civilization that had prevailed to this point at Fort King was gone, and the terrain around them was much more familiar to now the hostile natives. So it looks like the Seminoles and the U.S. soldiers came together to form a bond between the two groups, but then things got heated up, and that's when the Battle of Fort King started to rage on. As we move forward into the next room, we have a lot. We have also right here, there's a barrel of this is a Civil War cannon that they used in here at the fort and during the Second Seminole War. And then, of course, you got weapons of the war. It was this was a 69 caliber smoothbore flintlock, which measured 58 inches and weighed a heavy 10 pounds. The most skilled of soldiers could average 3 shots per minute at best, with an effective range on most days of less than 100 yards. Not a formidable weapon in the swamps of Florida. At one point, Wiley Thompson he was there, insisted that the Seminole only be given percussion cap versions of the Deering rifle that the government was supplying to the Seminoles. This would ensure that traders could control the inventory of percussion caps sold to the natives. Thompson hadn't thought through the unintended consequences of the directive, and the natives were soon better equipped than his own troops. He would soon come to find out. Primary weapon during the Seminole War was Model 1816, Springfield manufactured in Harp's Ferry. Wiley Thompson's decision ultimately made the Seminole better equipped than his own troops. That's a problem. Moving on to talking about this cannon right here.
I'm sure this is just what you're doing in the near future. I'm sure there's
So this cannon, this is where and look at those cannonballs. Those are real cannonballs. 10 pounds each.
and you only show to what's in the near future.
Cannon, I'll post it there. And little information exists concerning the origin of the mountain. Howitzer, supposedly the United States military copied a design for the cannon from a model that the French army used to subdue the allergens in the mountainous regions of their African homeland. As the mountain Howitzer earned the nickname as the gun that booms twice because its spherical case shot exploded a certain distance after it was fired, causing another explosion after the initial firing sound. This Howitzer before you is fully functional and used in many demonstrations in the reenactment at Fort King today. So this actually will fire during the reenactment. This is one of the cannons that they have with during this festival right here, Saturday, December 7th, and Sunday, December 8th. So in December, they will have the reenactments of the Seminole War, and this cannon will be used in the reenactments. That is awesome. And so it was acquired through a generous donation from the Filburn Foundation and the Fort King Heritage Association. And this is Fort King, National Historic Landmark. This is one of the cabins here, and some of the games that they played. Of course, I have one of these pamphlets already. Save the date for December 7th, 10 to 3. Be here for the reenactments and some of the food that they ate, some of the crafts that the Seminoles made. Of course, old. And there we go. Salter, the sutler. Principally, every frontier fort and Indian agency had a sutler close by. A sutler is kind of like a tent. It's like a little tent where they have where they sold different stuff, kind of like small items. You'd probably find like today would be like a dollar store or something. It's just small little crafts or snacks or light items, things to make stuff with. Alright, so now we're pushing onward here. We're going to talk about some of these different Seminole leaders, like Chief Osceola, who was very important to the Seminole War and Fort King in particular. Osceola, named Billy Powell at birth, was most famous warriors during the Seminole War, despite not being native to Florida or a member of the ruling clan. He was born in Alabama, and along with mother was driven to Florida after his people defeat in the Creek Civil War 1814. Osceola is referred to as Chief Osceola, but in fact he was never a chief. He was, however, a charismatic leader and remained steadfast in his refusal to leave Florida for Indian Territory. Alright, so Osceola originally held at Fort Marion in St. Augustine, where he became deathly ill, unable to escape with Coahuchi and others. He was later transformed to Fort Moultrie in South Carolina, where he died on January 30th, 1838, at the age of 34, only 3 months after his capture. His charisma, bravery, unwillingness to conform, and cunningness in battle made him a hero among many. He was buried with military honors at Fort Moultrie. Chief Osceola, who now is honored now at Florida State, who willingly now they are the Florida State Seminoles. Florida State University Seminoles team mascot is Chief Osceola, who rides on a horse called Renegade. And I was able to go to a game last year and actually see the traditional planting of the spear at midfield when they played Syracuse. That was so cool to see. And then at night, they actually have a flaming spear that Chief Osceola drives into the ground. Very cool to see. A very neat tradition at Florida State with Chief Osceola and Renegade. Now moving on to Micanopy. Was nearly 40 years old when he became a chief of the Seminole people. Now Micanopy is actually not very far from here. It's about 20 miles from here to Fort King, from Fort King to Micanopy, and he began to acquire a large amount of land and cattle, hired more than 100 fugitive slaves to work in his estate's cattle operations. These slaves were encouraged to intermarry with the Seminole and were considered their equals. Unlike the prevailing view from the whites at this time, slaveholders from Florida and neighboring states demanded that the Seminoles capture and return slaves who had escaped to Florida. In 1838, Micanopy was captured with Osceola and others by General Thompson S. Jessup's forces while under a false flag of truce. This breach of honor by the U.S. military was considered an outrage by much of the public, and Micanopy was eventually sent with 200 other Seminoles to Indian Territory in Oklahoma after his imprisonment in South Carolina. Micanopy died at Fort Gibson on January 2nd of 1849. And now we're going to move on to by the end of the war. I'm going to read the last ones here. The Seminoles were taken to Oklahoma, arrived with almost nothing to their names. They were situated on lands with which they were unfamiliar. The government had promised them a land of their own, but instead they found themselves on the reservation of the Creek Indians, same people who had previously allied with the United States Army against them. Many of them, during the end of the war, was the beginning of the rest of the story in the Deep South, and Florida in particular. Ultimately, the wild and untamed Florida would be in parts dredged, drained, filled, and transformed for development. The nation's goals of occupying Florida and capitalizing on her resources were realized, but at a significant cost to others. Cultural practices of the Seminoles were threatened as the lifestyles were adapted to changing environments and assimilation to their new neighbors, the white settlers. Along with their brothers and sisters in the rest of the South, African Americans in Florida continued to suffer through emancipation, terror lynchings, the Civil Rights era, and Jim Crow laws that served to institutionalize economic and educational social disadvantages for African American and other people of color living in the South. End of the war. Alright, so back outside now as we walk through the grounds here. We're going to actually walk the trailhead, which was back this way. I kind of came out the back door. But we're going to walk the trailhead and see the different landmarks of where each of the battle took place here at Fort King. And then, of course, we'll end up at the main place, the Fort King. So, let's go ahead and make our way down the trailhead. Where do we start? Let's actually just start right here with the cannons. I think this is where we start. And then, let's start at this cannon. Rules for the throw. Oh. And then we have this cannon right here. This cannon looks like it was also part of the here, part of the firing here. I think. Maybe not. Doesn't look like it moves. But very cool to see. Alright, so we're on the trail now. I'm guessing we'll just go straight. There's a fork in the road. I'm kind of glad that we're literally walking through the woods. But not good to walk it through the woods, but I had to make do because I'm actually heading to a birthday party on the way in Gainesville. But since I have a little bit of time, I wanted to stop off here at Fort King and talk a little bit about the history of Fort King and the Battle of Fort King. And so we're kind of making our way around through the woods. This is kind of, I guess some of this wooded area, of course it was way back in the 1800s, we're actually walking on the battlegrounds at this point. Of course, there's a bench here. Memory of Wayne and Catherine McCall. Oh, their 47-year stewardship of this property made the Fort King National Landmark possible. Ooh, bench right here. So, well, we're going to make our way through. Like I said, it's very shaded, thankfully. This is crazy. Like, where am I supposed to walk? Oh, great, now there's 3 paths. Alright, so... yeah. Let's go straight, I guess. There's something over here, I think. Let's see what's up here. This is part of it, I think. Oh yeah, this is a steep hill. So. Okay. What is this? This was part of it, I guess. Top of a wood fence. This is just the area here. Let's go back down because there was some land markings down there. Alright, heading back down the hill. There's nothing up here but a wooden fence. It used to be an old gate, I guess. Let's go back. The Seep Spring, which is right here. This is what the lady was talking about inside the visitor center, of how the soldiers drank the water from this, which I don't think I would. To be honest, it looks disgusting. But anyway, this was back when they, when the Civil War, or when the Second Seminole War was being fought. So, before Governor Duval and Indian Gad Humphreys could choose a location to build Fort King, there were several features that would require for a site to be considered suitable. One of these requirements would have been a reliable source for drinking water, the Seep Spring. A small body of water before you is called a seep or seep spring. Unlike a natural spring that has constant feed of underground water from the aquifer, a seep spring is a result of a low-lying area or ravine that forms a pool of water. The process of percolation that feeds this seep spring serves as a natural filtration system as the groundwater moves through the sand and small vegetation, eventually pooling into the fresh water pond you see here. 1827, this area would have looked very different. The Seep Spring itself would have been larger and would have provided enough water for bathing, livestock, and general consumption for the residents of Fort King. Years of agricultural use, natural erosion, and development of surrounding areas has changed the look and possibly the size of a seep spring. Today, this seep spring is one of the few natural water features in the area. It provides important support for small wildlife at Fort King. There we go. We have made it to the fort. This is Fort King, right here. Let's go inside and have a look. I've made it out of the woods. Into the blazing sun. Sunshine State of Florida. They don't call it that for nothing. Let's go have a look at the fort. We are now inside the fort of Fort King. So let's start the Seminole War. Here we go. Battle raged on. No absolute consciousness as to the beginning and ending dates of the Seminole War. Consistence. Beginning and ending dates of the Seminole War. However, most historians have settled on a range of 1816 to 1858. It was a lengthy conflict, aggravated by broken promises and failed negotiations spanning more than 4 decades. Reasons cited for the Seminole War were many, but most agreed the United States government desired to have control of Florida for reasons relative to defense and commerce. American settlers desired to expand into Florida territory, which created conflicts with the Seminoles, who were there long before them. Because the Spanish government, who owned the land, had outlawed slavery in Florida, this land also became a sanctuary for escaped slaves who crossed the border to take refuge. It is important to note that even the years in between the 3 distinct war years were rife with tension and conflict. This explains why so many consider this one war, not 3. The war on the Seminoles extended so long for many reasons. Seminoles were masters of guerrilla warfare and had the advantage of familiarity with the land. This was, after all, their land. The U.S. Army lacked funding and other resources and were otherwise disadvantaged by a constant changing of leadership and strategy. On top of this, the soldiers could never acclimate to the oppressive Florida summer climate right now. Thus, the troops had to be called back over the summers, causing them to lose any ground they had gained over the previous winter. This allowed the Seminoles time to regroup and strategize. And here was their trail. First Seminole War, 1817 to 1818. This is a map of their battles. Like they had the Scott Massacre, Fort Scott. This was in the Panhandle. I'd like to go to this one day. Go to Pensacola. Battle of Pensacola. There was Fort Gadsden, St. Mark's Fort St. Mark, Scott Massacre, Foultown, Fort Scott. There's Fort Scott, Mixuki Battle of Mikuski, Battle of Inconfina Creek, and Battle of Old Town. That's where all the battles were, just in the First Seminole War. As the battle raged on, came into the Second Seminole War. After years of managing conflicts between the American settlers and Native Americans all along the East Coast, the United States government passed the Indian Removal Act 1830, which sought to relocate all Native Americans to newly established Indian territory west of the Mississippi River. In Florida, this meant the Seminoles once again to be displaced. Tensions rose and fighting began, with the Seminoles attacked on Major Francis Dade battlefield reference, and his troops were en route to Fort King. Almost simultaneous killing of the Indian removal agent Wiley Thompson and others at Fort King in December of 1835. 7 years, the war continued, eventually resulting in the removal of most Seminole population to Oklahoma. It was during the conflict that Osceola and Micanopy were captured by the U.S. Army under a false flag of truce. Saw that in the visitor center. At the end of the war, in 1842, a few hundred Seminoles were permitted to remain in South Florida. A lengthy conflict aggravated by broken promises and failed negotiations, the Seminole War spanned more than 4 decades. Second Seminole War from 1835 to 1842. The Third Seminole War only lasted a few years. Not long. They continued to push further south into the state, putting more pressure on the Seminoles and making it nearly impossible for them to survive. U.S. Army destroyed a Seminole plantation west of the Everglades in December of 1855. The Seminoles retaliated with an attack near Fort Myers. This set into motion the balance of Seminole War, which consisted mainly of minor raids. Many more Seminoles who had either surrendered or been captured were relocated to Oklahoma. Those that remained lived deep in the Everglades and the Big Cypress swamp land that the white settlers did not want. Now time to go up into the barricades. The towers, the watchtower. Maybe not. Never mind. I thought we were allowed to go up in the towers. Where do we go? Can we go there? Or is it outside? Do we have to go outside and walk in? We might have to go outside and walk in. But we will go into the barricades. Right now, we're actually just inside the fort right now. We're reading the different battles of the First, Second, Third Seminole Wars. The Third Seminole War wasn't as long as the Second Seminole War, which is mainly known for around the Battle of Fort King. And then I'll display the maps right now to show you guys the different locations of where each battle took place and how far the south the American settlers pushed back the Seminole tribes further south to where they ran out of resources and supplies. So go ahead and find our way to the top at the barricades. Attack on Fort King on December 28th of 1835. Same day as the Dade Massacre, Fort King Indian removal agent General Wiley Thompson was anticipating the arrival of Dade's reinforcements at the time. General Thompson and Lieutenant Constantine Smith taking their time. And were taking their time and customary afternoon stroll outside the Fort King palisade, making their way to Restus Rogers' cabin a short distance away. During their stroll, 60 Seminole warriors, led by Osceola, orchestrated a brutal attack on Fort King right out of nowhere. Shots rang out from the woodland, killing both General Thompson and Constantine Smith outside the fort. Osceola scalped General Thompson, and then he and his men made their way to a settler's cabin. There, Mr. Rogers, Mr. Hitzler, 2 clerks, a young boy, were also shot and killed. Oh no. The Seminoles then burned the settler's store and ran off. Wow. Okay. Sir, I have the honor to report to you that my arrival at this post, which I reached on the evening of the 28th instant, I have been delayed by unavoidable deterrents. Upon the road several days beyond the time I fixed upon for the accomplishment of my journey. Although I regret exceedingly, sir, to the barrier of such unwelcome and melancholy tidings to you, and wish in my heart that the interest of your department could wear a more promising aspect in the quarter. it was on Wiley Thompson, graphic account of the attack on Wiley Thompson with the fort, as described by Lieutenant Joseph Harris. All right. And then the start of the Second Seminole War. First attack on the deadly day of the Dade Massacre. 2 companies of U.S. troops were dispatched to Fort Brooke in Tampa under the leadership of Brevet Major Francis L. Dade. Their mission was to resupply and reinforce the troops at Fort King. The morning of December 28th of 1835, the troops were ambushed near present-day Bushnell by a group of Seminoles under the leadership of Chief Micanopy. Micanopy and his men disarmed the soldiers, and only one of the 110 soldiers survived. This event is known as the Dade Massacre. An eyewitness account of the Dade Massacre. Oh my. Ooh, alright, a lot more shade up here. We are actually now finally inside of one of the barricades in the fort. Now, behind me, of course, is what they would have. Up here, they would have a lot of supplies and a lot of ammo, a lot of resources up here. And of course, some soldiers up here in hiding from the Seminoles during the Second Seminole War, during which the battle at Fort King. So, like I said, we're in one of the barricades. Very cool up here, especially on a hot day here in Florida, as in May. We haven't had rain in 2 weeks, over 2 weeks, almost a month. But anyway, beside the point, up here is more, like they said, like I said, they store their supplies, their resources, and a bunch of the American soldiers from the Seminole attacks at Fort King, which, like I said, they went, burned the fort, or burned the cabin, and what kind of bird is that? Wow, that's pretty. Hold on, hoping it comes back around. It wasn't an osprey. I don't know what kind of bird that is, but anyway, very, like I said, very cool up here. It's not hot at all. More or less of a hideout. We're in a hideout, and this is, and some of these were actually used for ammunition, guns, cannons. Cannons were up here, which, how they carried a cannon up here, I have no idea, but it made it work. And one of the windows where I have my camera at right now was actually sitting right here, above here, and when shots were fired, of course, it was without warning that Chief Osceola ambushed the fort and burned down Wiley's cabin, just literally a couple blocks from here. And so, whoa, that was cool. Looked like it was about to fly right in here. All right, but overall, that's kind of what happened here. Very exciting and interesting bits of information as we walk around the fort a little bit more. Of course, we'll have more stuff to talk about as we make our journey through the rest of the way, and then continue on our real journey to our final destination of Gainesville. All right, so in conclusion, as I wrap this up about Fort King, it was typical U.S. Army frontier fort, notably a symbol of the longest and costliest war America had with its native people, the Seminole War. Fort King is a narrative that speaks of a complicated history as it relates to occupation of the state of Florida, and is the story of young country struggling to thrive and of native inhabitants trying to survive. It was Fort King's position in the center of the state and at the northern border of the Seminole Reservation made it one of the most important posts in support of the federal mandates. Throughout the war, it's commonly said, all roads lead to Fort King. And in fact, they did. In 1827, Colonel Duncan L. Clinch described the post's importance as follows. From my knowledge of the Indian character, I consider this post of more importance in controlling the Indians and in giving protection and security to the inhabitants of Florida than any other post in their territory, as it is in the immediate vacancy of the largest number of Florida Indians, and between them and the white inhabitants. And also, the story of Fort King is one that demands retelling. And all roads lead to Fort King in Ocala, Florida.